As time continues to pass since we've left the European Union, we are now as a nation relying more and more on non-EU workers as opposed to EU workers from across the board. We'll have a look at these analyses exclusively from The Guardian. Let's go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys, wherever you are in the world. This is REGANELITE here with an exclusive from The Guardian with regards to non-EU workers outnumbering EU ones in various UK sectors in post-Brexit shift. So as you guys know, obviously, since we left the European Union, it's become more and more difficult for EU workers to come and work in this country. But as since then, the emphasis is obviously of the government to push more British workers into jobs, it's becoming clear that there's not enough workers to fill those vacancies. So rather than getting back EU workers, the government has been sourcing from outside the EU, which is obviously, I just don't see why we have to be so vehemently against having EU workers. But excuse me, guys, as I digress. So headlines from The Guardian here: non-EU workers outnumber EU ones in various UK sectors in post-Brexit shift. The analysis shows shift work towards non-EU and British workers in sectors which once relied on the EU workforce. So there are now more non-EU than EU workers in a number of sectors that were previously reliant on European citizens, demonstrating the Brexit effects and the impact of the international events on immigration patterns. The Guardian's analysis shows that the number of non-EU workers surpassed the EU counterparts for the first time in 2022 at an average of 2.7 million against 2.5 million workers last year. It also shows the various sectors which once relied on EU workers, such as accommodation and food services, admin and wholesale, retail and vehicle repair, have shifted towards non-EU and British employees. Yeah, we just made it more difficult for EU workers to be here, and especially if they have family, relatives and friends, of course, as they would do back in their home nations. When they go back there, it's much more difficult for them to come back into the UK, which is also making it harder and discouraging them from coming back to the United Kingdom. So that is also playing a factor, but we'll look at the numbers in just a moment. Other sectors such as agriculture, forestry and fishing still depend on EU workers, but have witnessed change. About 1 in 7 people employed in the sectors last summer were EU citizens, a significant decline from the 23% before the pandemic. The proportion of non-EU workers has risen to 6% compared to 2% in 2019 and 1% before the Brexit referendum. Yeah, so before even the vote, it was basically 1%. Quite a stark contrast when you think of from then to now. So non-EU workers have overtaken EU citizens in some industries. So if you can see, I don't know if you guys, I'm assuming you guys can see the graphs here from UR, but you can see accommodation and food services. We've always had more EU than non-EU, and as you can see, since that's changed obviously there because of leaving the European Union. Same again with administration and support services. You can see that that's also changed as well. Wholesale, vehicle, retail and vehicle repair. As you guys can see, it's a lot closer there, but a non-EU has just started overtaking it just recently. Real estate, real estate has always been, looks like over the last several years or so, has always been non-EU, and it continues to go up. Professional, scientific and technical again. Mining and quarrying is kind of meh, because we don't really have that much here in the United Kingdom, but as you can see by all these graphs, there has been a massive shift here. Guardian graphic is from HMRC, monthly counts of payroll employed by the UK in the sector. Only non-EU nationals are included in these graphs, guys. So the director of Oxford University Migration Observatory, Madeleine Sumpson, said Brexit had contributed to the shift in which decisions such as work visa systems for care workers and the liberalisation of post-study work rules for international students. But it's definitely not the only thing going on. The Brexit policies restrict migration into low-wage industries, she said. However, this migration into low-wage industries ended up happening anyway for other reasons that were not part of the Brexit process, such as the Hong Kong and Ukraine schemes have increased demand from the NHS. Yeah, so we're a lot more open when it comes to Hong Kong and Ukraine, obviously, with what's happening with both of their nations respectively. Before 2020, two-thirds of foreign workers in the hospitality and administration service sectors were EU citizens, as well as half of those wholesale, vehicle retail and repair, and the mining sector. Now they make up fewer than half of non-UK born workers, according to HMRC's data. In the real estate industry, the professional and scientific sector makeup of international workforces was close to 50-50 before 2020. Now, non-EU workers make up 55% in total, with a sharp increase since the beginning of 2021. So this is non-EU workers have also risen in areas where the international workforce still comes primarily from the UK. So these are sectors that we still heavily rely on EU. So agriculture, forestry and fishery. You can see that it's gone down really for both of them, but we still rely quite a lot on the EU there. Arts, entertainment and recreation. It's always been more EU again, but as you can see, the numbers have dipped obviously because of Brexit. Construction. It's always been very high. We've always relied on a lot of construction workers from the European Union, and that does it. But we have seen an increase, obviously, in non-EU workers as well. But it doesn't appear to be too much of a change in terms of the graph there. Manufacturing, again, more EU than non-EU. It's kind of been the same, but that could start to go down. With that could start to change, obviously, with our manufacturing industry is at risk, and because of some of the tariff and trade barriers that we have in the UK now. So that graph could change in the future, depending on if we get a new Labour government, what will happen in there. Transportation and storage, again, more reliant on the EU than non-EU there, but you can see just at the edge there's just been a little tick rise up in non-EU workers in that sector. Not too much change in water supply, sewage and waste at the end. Still heavily reliant, but as you can see, most of these ones, obviously, we still rely heavily on the EU workers outright still. So manufacturing in the arts of entertainment industry still employs more EU citizens than non-EU nationals, but the number of the Latin has risen as European numbers drop. So between 2029 and 2022, the number of non-EU citizens employed in manufacturing grew by 23%, with a similar 5% decrease among EU staff in arts and entertainment. The increase was 13% against a 12% fall in the number of EU workers. The proportion of non-EU foreign workers in the health increased from 10% to the total workforce in 2019 to 14% in December 2022. So this one here, this is non-EU workers have increased in sectors where there are main international workforce. So these ones here have always been mainly non-EU, brackets in thousands. So education has had an uptick, obviously, since Brexit. Energy production and supply, an uptick again because of leaving the European Union. Finances and insurance, again, another increase because of Brexit. Health and social care workers, a massive jump there in the non-EU workers there. It was already going up, but it really shot up, obviously, since we left. Information and communication, as you can see, again, shot itself up right during the time of when we left the EU. Public administration and defence has kind of been the same there. Not too much has changed, obviously, so it's there. The analysis shows the number of non-EU workers have risen steadily since 2014, the first year of which data is available, but accelerated from the beginning of 2021 to reach almost 3 million by December 2022, a 40% increase in 2 years. The number of EU workers remained stable over the same period, with an increase of just 1% between December 2020 and December 2022, coinciding with the ending of freedom of movement at the ending of 2020. Yeah, so once the freedom of movement officially ended, it wasn't when the vote happened, there was a drop, but when we left officially left at the end of 2020, that's when things shifted, obviously. Pre-Brexit forecasts suggest industries which have previously relied heavily on EU workers would struggle to recruit migrant workers because most of the jobs were not considered skilled enough to qualify for the immigration system, says some of them. But the reality is quite different. All major industries have increased recruitment because of non-EU workers, often shaped, she said, was mainly because more non-EU workers going mad. Non-EU workers often sharpened, she said. This was mainly because more non-EU citizens have come to the UK in the non-work routes that allow them to work in the job. Also, perhaps family members of visa holders in international studies who are allowed to work part-time during their studies. So, as we can see, guys, because of Brexit, because of the leaving the European Union, there has been obviously a dramatic change in terms of the workers that we've had in our country. What does this mean? Well, it just means that we're slow. I mean, at the moment we are still relying in many sectors of EU citizens, but the longer we're out of the EU, as time will pass, that will obviously change, because of these barriers making it more difficult for them. I actually do believe that it will become easier for EU citizens to come to the UK under a Labour government. I could be wrong, but that's my prediction. I do believe that they will ease those restrictions, because quite simply we are in desperate need of more workers, and I do believe that we will have a closer tie with the European Union. I'd like to think that Labour will take us straight back into the EU, but we honestly don't know if that's going to happen. We don't think that's going to happen, but this is just this damage, obviously, because of Brexit and cutting us off from the rest of the world, and not having the workers that we need is detrimental to us. And we've seen that obviously since because of what happened during the pandemic, and then obviously when the pandemic was kind of over, many of those workers were not coming back, which is what led us to a major shortage of workers. So what do you guys think of these numbers? Are any of you surprised by some of these numbers? Let me know down in the comments section down below. I think it's quite interesting to see where they go. But thanks very much for watching. Like, share and subscribe, and I will catch you guys very, very soon.